I swear I stared at that email for a whole minute before I could even breathe. Outstanding balance $684.90. It wasn't even the amount that broke me, it was what it stood for. Another thing for my daughter that I couldn't afford. Another reminder that the ground was dropping out from under us inch by inch. I sat at the kitchen table, the same wobbly one I'd dragged through 3 apartments, and tried to convince myself I could figure this out. I always do, right? That's what I tell my daughter. Mom's got it handled. Even when I don't. But that morning, something inside me finally cracked. Maybe it was the way she'd hugged me before school, whispering, "Please don't worry, Mom." Like she was the parent. Maybe it was the fact that I'd skipped dinner the night before because the fridge looked like a desert, or maybe I was just tired of pretending. I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My thumb hovered over 4 names I hadn't seen or said out loud in years. The 4 men I swore I'd never talk to again. Not after everything. Not after what happened the night that split my life in 2. But desperation does strange things to your pride. I didn't even type their names into the group chat. I created it with shaking fingers and watched their numbers link together like something dangerous. Like something I should have deleted before it started. Instead, I typed, "My daughter's bill is due. I need help." Just that. No explanations. No details. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my teeth. I hit send before I could chicken out and tossed the phone onto the table like it burned. I told myself they wouldn't respond. Why would they? I was a ghost from their past. Someone they probably forgot the minute they walked out the door. But not even 30 seconds passed before the screen lit up. First one message, then another, then 2 more. 4 names. 4 replies. 4 men I never wanted tangled in my life again, especially not now. Especially not with the secret I'd kept buried for so long. I didn't even read what they wrote at first. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I knew this was a mistake. A huge, stupid mistake. But bills don't care about shame. Hunger doesn't care about old wounds. And the thought of my daughter sitting in class, worrying about something she shouldn't even have to think about, that was the part that kept me frozen in my chair. I finally picked up the phone. My fingers were trembling so hard I almost dropped it, and before I could even open the messages, another notification popped up. "We're coming." Just that. No question mark. No hesitation. 4 men I'd spent years avoiding were suddenly on their way back into my life, and all I could think was, God, what have I just started? I spent the whole afternoon pretending everything was normal. I washed the dishes, folded laundry that didn't really need folding, checked the mailbox twice like some miracle check might suddenly appear. Anything to keep my mind off the fact that 4 men who should have stayed far, far away were headed straight toward the life I'd built without them. I kept replaying that text in my head. We're coming. Coming where? My house, the school, my job. They didn't even ask if they should. They just decided, like they always did. By the time my daughter got home, I'd rehearsed a smile so many times it felt like my face might crack. She walked in, dropped her backpack, and started talking about a science project with this breathless excitement that made my chest ache. She had no idea I'd opened a door that should have stayed bolted shut. While she worked on her homework, my phone kept buzzing on the counter. Over and over, I didn't dare look. I knew the rhythm of each of their tempers too well. The clipped tone, the sharp questions, the way they turned everything into something they controlled. It wasn't until she went to her room that I finally picked up the phone and opened the messages. The first one was straight to the point. "Is this about her?" The second, "Why are you messaging us now?" The third, "You need to tell us exactly what's going on." And the fourth one, the one that made my breath catch, simply said, "Her name. Tell me her name." I felt my pulse in my wrists. They didn't know, not yet, but they were suspicious enough to start connecting dots. I'd spent 13 years keeping that part of my life under wraps, making sure the past never touched the little girl who saved me from it. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a question. It was a screenshot. My daughter's school fundraiser post that I'd shared last week. My daughter's name was right there, her full name. They'd found it. I swear my knees went weak. I had to hold onto the counter just to stay upright. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or throw the phone into the sink and drown it like some cursed object. The next message came in before I could even gather my thoughts. "We need to talk. Tonight." I typed back, "No," but I didn't send it. What was I going to do? Block all four of them and pretend nothing happened. They had money, connections, resources I couldn't even imagine. If they wanted to dig deeper, they would. They already were. Another message showed up. If her name is what I think it is, we have a right to know. I felt sick. Because they were right. Not legally. Not in any way that mattered on paper, but morally, emotionally. That was another story. One I'd been refusing to open for more than a decade. I locked my phone, sat down at the table, and buried my face in my hands. They knew her name, and now it was only a matter of time before they figured out the rest. I spent the next few hours jumping at every sound outside, a car door slamming, footsteps on the sidewalk, even the neighbor's dog barking. My nerves were stretched so tight I felt like one wrong move would snap me in half. I kept telling myself they wouldn't actually show up. That they were just being dramatic, the way powerful men do when they're used to people giving in. But deep down, I knew better. These four never did anything halfway. Not when I knew them, and certainly not now. By 8 o'clock the sun was gone and the house was quiet in that eerie heavy way that makes every shadow look like it's waiting for you to breathe wrong. My daughter had fallen asleep on the couch, face smushed against a blanket she's had since she was 5. I didn't have the heart to move her. I was in the kitchen reheating leftover pasta when there was a knock. Not a polite tap tap tap. A firm, steady knock that immediately told me exactly who it was. My whole body went cold. For a second, I actually considered pretending I wasn't home, but the hallway light was on. The blinds were open, and they're kind of men don't leave just because you ignore them. I set the bowl down, wiped my palms on my jeans, and walked to the door with the kind of dread you feel in medical waiting rooms and court hallways. When I opened it, they were all there, all four, standing on my tiny porch like some silent wall of tension and questions I wasn't ready to answer. They didn't say anything at first, they just looked at me, each in their own way. One looked angry, one looked confused, one looked like he'd been expecting this, and the last one, he looked hurt. Not dramatic hurt, real hurt, the kind you can't fake. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. My voice barely worked. "You know why we're here," one of them said. "I asked for help with a bill," I replied. "Not this." "That's not the point," another cut in. "We saw her name." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me so my daughter wouldn't wake up. "You shouldn't have looked her up." "What were we supposed to do?" the angriest one snapped. "Ignore the fact that you vanished for 13 years and suddenly show up asking for money? For a kid?" "She's my daughter," I said. "That's all you need to know." But it wasn't. Not for them. "Is she?" One began, but he didn't finish the question. He didn't need to. I knew exactly what he was trying to ask. My throat tightened. "I'm not doing this here. We're not leaving," the hurt one said quietly. "Not until you tell us the truth." I looked at the four of them, 4 different histories, 4 different versions of the night I'd tried to forget, and realized this moment was inevitable. I'd been running on borrowed time. Sooner or later, the past catches up. I took a shaky breath. "Fine," I said. "You want answers? You'll get them, but not tonight. She's asleep." They exchanged glances, all of them tense in their own way. "We'll be back tomorrow," one said. "No," I replied. "Tomorrow I'll come to you." They didn't like that. I could see it in their faces. But they didn't argue. When they finally walked away, the air felt heavy, like the world had shifted a few inches off its axis. I closed the door, rested my forehead against it, and tried not to fall apart, because tomorrow I'd have to tell them everything. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, fragments of that night pushed their way back into my mind like a movie I never wanted to watch again. I hadn't thought about it in years. Not really. I'd shoved it into the farthest corner of my memory and buried it under work, late bills, and the day-to-day scramble of being a single mom. But knowing I had to face them made everything feel sharp again. By the next afternoon, I'd arranged for my neighbor, Mrs. Keller, to watch my daughter. I didn't tell her anything. She didn't need the details, just that I had an appointment. The less people involved, the better. I took the bus across town, mostly because my hands were shaking too badly to trust myself behind a steering wheel. Their message had said to meet at an office building I remembered all too well. Sleek glass, tall columns, and the kind of lobby that makes you feel underdressed no matter what you're wearing. As I walked through the revolving doors, the memories hit even harder. The last time I'd been here, I was younger, dumber, and convinced I was invincible. I didn't realize back then how quickly one night can flip your entire life upside down. The elevator doors opened to a conference room where all four of them sat, spaced out like they'd claimed different corners of the world. They looked at me as I walked in, not angry, not smug, just waiting. I closed the door behind me. "Okay," I said. "You want the truth. Here it is." I sat down at the far end of the table, keeping distance between us. It felt safer that way. "You remember the company party," I began. 13 years ago. One of them tensed immediately. Another exhaled like he'd been holding air since I walked in. I stared at my hands. I shouldn't have gone. I was overwhelmed. I was trying to prove something to myself, and I made a stupid choice. No one spoke. They just watched. "It was chaotic," I said. "Everyone drinking, everyone trying to outdo everyone else, people flirting with whoever was convenient, lines getting blurry." I rubbed my forehead, and I got caught in the middle of it. I lifted my head. It wasn't one moment. It wasn't one person. It was too many things happening too fast, too many mixed signals, too much pressure, too much noise, and I walked away from that night with nothing but the certainty that I needed out. One of them leaned forward. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," I cut in, "that I left before sunrise, packed whatever I could, and disappeared because I didn't feel safe staying in that world anymore." The room went silent, heavy. The kind of silence that makes you feel like the floor might give out. And a month later, I said softly, "I found out I was pregnant." Their faces shifted. Confusion, shock, fear, guilt, all blending together. "I didn't come after any of you," I said. "I didn't want anyone claiming me or her or twisting the story into something it wasn't. I just needed to protect my kid and myself." The angriest one finally spoke, but his voice was quiet. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I didn't know who I could trust," I said. "And because it wasn't about any of you anymore. It was about her." One of them swallowed hard. "So she could be—" "Yes," I said. "She could be any of you." My voice cracked then, because it was the first time I'd ever said it out loud, and that's why I stayed gone. No one spoke after that. They just sat there, absorbing the truth I'd spent 13 years holding in my chest like a burning coal. And for the first time since they'd shown up at my door, I felt a strange kind of relief, the kind that comes from finally saying the thing that's been eating you alive. The moment the words left my mouth, "She could be any of you," something shifted in the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just a tightening, like everyone suddenly forgot how to breathe. They didn't explode, not at first. It was quieter than that, which somehow made it worse. The one who usually kept his cool was the first to break the silence. "So you've been raising her alone, all these years, without saying anything?" There wasn't accusation in his voice, just disbelief. But disbelief can turn sharp fast. "I did what I had to do," I said. "For who?" The angry one snapped. "For you or for her? Because if she was mine—" "She's not a possession," I cut in. "She's a child. My child. And maybe ours," the quietest one said, barely above a whisper. That hit harder than any shout could have. The tension morphed then, anger turning inward, sideways, bouncing between them like static. They started talking over each other, not yelling, but close enough that the air felt electric. "You said you left because you didn't feel safe. How did it get so out of control that night? We should have been paying attention. If she's mine, I've missed 13 years. We all have." Each sentence layered on top of the next, heavy and fast, the guilt building like a pressure cooker. It didn't take long before they stopped aiming questions at me and started aiming them at each other. "Where were you that night?" "No, where were you? You were always pushing things too far." "Oh, that's rich coming from you. You think this is a joke?" "Enough," the calm one finally said, startling everyone. "None of this matters. Not yet." He turned to me. "What do you want from us?" The simplest question, the hardest to answer. Because the truth, I didn't want anything. Not money, not involvement, not this confrontation. I'd just been drowning, and sending that message had been a moment of weakness, a crack in the wall I built around my life. But now the wall was gone. And I was standing in front of four men who suddenly realized the world might be bigger than whatever versions of me they remembered. "I want her to be safe," I said. "That's it. That's all I've ever wanted." "That's not an answer." the angry one said, but his voice wasn't sharp anymore. It sounded tired, worn out. I didn't bring you into this to fix the past, I told them. I reached out because I needed help with a bill, not because I wanted to open old wounds. But the wounds are open, one of them said quietly. I looked down at my hands. I know. Another pause. Slow. Heavy. Finally, the calm one spoke again. There's only one way to move forward. I already knew what he meant. The test. The thing that would break the last 13 years into a before and after. But hearing him say it out loud made my stomach drop. We need to know, he said. All of us. I looked at each of them. 4 men staring at a truth none of us were ready for. My voice came out thin. If we do this, everything changes. We know, he said. But the truth was, none of us did. The appointment was set for the following Thursday, but those 6 days in between felt like 6 months. I tried to keep life normal for my daughter. School drop-offs, grocery runs, helping her finish a poster project she kept putting off. But inside, it felt like someone was slowly tightening a rope around my ribcage. The men didn't bother me much during that week. A few check-ins, a couple of questions about logistics. They kept it professional, almost cold, like everyone was afraid to push too hard and make things fall apart. On the morning of the test, I woke up before my alarm. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. My daughter was still asleep, curled up like she used to when she was little. I brushed a piece of hair off her forehead and tried not to think about how different everything could look by the end of the day. Mrs. Keller walked her to school so I could go alone. I didn't want her anywhere near the tension I knew was coming. The testing clinic was one of those plain medical buildings that smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. When I walked into the waiting room, all 4 of them were already there. They weren't talking, just sitting in separate chairs like they'd deliberately spaced themselves apart. When they saw me, they all stood up at once. For a moment, no one said anything. Then the calm one gestured toward the receptionist's desk. We've checked in. I nodded, but my throat was too tight to speak. The process was straightforward. Paperwork, ID, signatures. They called me back first. Swab, seal, done. When I stepped out of the room, the men were waiting, one by one being taken in behind me. I sat down, clasped my hands in my lap, and stared at the pale green wall until the whole thing was over. We didn't talk much afterward. It felt like every word might trigger something none of us were ready to handle. When we finally parted ways, it was with a strange, quiet understanding, the kind that comes when the future is out of your hands. The results were supposed to take a week. They came in 3 days. I was home alone when the call came in. My daughter still at school. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Even though my hands were shaking so hard, I had to brace my elbow on the table. The woman on the line was calm, gentle, too gentle, like she already knew the news would hit hard. She confirmed my name, confirmed the test, and then she told me. My ears rang. For a moment, I didn't hear anything else, not her polite closing, not the quiet click of the call ending, just the result echoing in my head, solid as a brick. One of them, one of the 4. A truth I'd avoided for more than a decade was suddenly real, printed on a piece of paper sitting in my email inbox. And he, the father, had no idea yet. I don't know how long I sat there at the table staring at nothing. Long enough that the sun changed angles and the room shifted from bright to dim without me noticing. When my phone buzzed, I flinched. A message. From him. Just 2 words. Did they call? I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Because once I did, there'd be no more running, no more hiding, no more pretending the past was something I'd outrun. Everything was about to change, not just for me, but for him. And for my daughter. I didn't answer his message that night. I couldn't. I sat with the phone in my hand until the battery dipped into red, staring at those 2 words. Did they call? Like they were a cliff edge. I think part of me hoped he'd send something else. Maybe follow up. Maybe push. Maybe say he was coming over. But he didn't. Not him. Not any of them. For the first time since this whole thing started, they gave me space. The next morning, after my daughter left for school, I finally typed out a reply. Yes, we need to talk. I didn't tell him the result over text. Whatever this was going to become, it needed to happen face to face. He suggested meeting at a small park on the edge of town, a quiet place, nothing like the high-rise offices or the polished buildings where they live their lives. I got there early and sat on a bench, hands shoved deep in my coat pockets trying to steady my breathing. When he arrived, he looked different. Not physically, he still had that same steady, careful way of moving, but something in his expression was softer, like he'd spent the last few days thinking about things he'd never thought about before. He sat beside me, not too close. "Well," he said. I pulled the folded paper from my bag. The official letter. The thing that turned 13 years of uncertainty into one undeniable truth. His eyes scanned it, slowly at first, then faster, until he finally stopped on the line that revealed everything. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just held the paper like it weighed more than he expected. When he finally looked up, his voice sounded different, not confident, not calculated, just human. "She's mine." I swallowed hard. "Yes." He closed his eyes for a moment, and I couldn't tell if he was relieved or overwhelmed or both. When he opened them again, they were glassy, not crying, but close. "I missed everything," he said quietly. "Her first steps, her first words." "I know," I said. "I would have been there," he said, voice cracking just slightly. "If I'd known, I would have." "I believe you," I said, and I meant it. Whatever happened all those years ago, I could see now he wasn't the man he was back then. None of them were. We sat in silence for a long moment before he finally asked, "Does she know anything?" "No," I said. "She knows she has me. That's it." He nodded, slowly absorbing that. "I don't want to disrupt her life, or yours." "But," I asked, "but I want to know her. Even if it's slow, even if it's on your terms." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they scared me, but because they didn't. Because for the first time the idea didn't feel like a threat. It felt possible. "I need boundaries," I said. "Real ones." "Whatever you decide," he said. "I'll follow it." That was what finally cracked something open in me. The respect, the patience, the willingness to meet me where I was instead of trying to take control. We talked for a long time after that, not about the past, not about blame, just about what the next steps could look like, what we each needed, what our daughter deserved. When we finally stood up to leave, he hesitated. "Can I meet her?" he asked. "Not today, not soon, just someday." I took a breath, felt the weight of everything pressing against me, fear, hope, uncertainty, possibility, and I nodded. "Someday," I said, "when she's ready." He gave a small, grateful smile, the kind that looked like it hurt to make, and then he walked away, leaving me alone on the path. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt steady, like maybe the future didn't have to be built on old fear anymore. Maybe it could be rewritten, not perfectly, not easily, but honestly, for me, for him, and most of all, for her.